Clara Weston pressed her back against the train car wall and stopped breathing. He was standing on the Clearwater platform. Harlan Voss. The man who had sent her father to prison. The man who had stolen their land with forged papers and a bribed judge. The man she had spent 9 years collecting evidence against before fleeing Kansas 3 weeks ago. He was already here. He was already smiling. And he was watching the train door like a man who knew exactly who was about to walk through it. Before we continue with Clara and Eli's story, please subscribe to our channel and stay with us until the very end to find out whether love can survive when the past follows you 2,000 miles west. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel and how many hearts they find along the way. Clara didn't move for 10 seconds. She counted them the way her father had taught her to count when she was 8 years old and frightened. One breath, one number, one solid fact at a time, until the fear became something manageable instead of something that swallowed you whole. 1. Harlan Voss was standing on a train platform in Clearwater, Montana territory. 2. He should not be here. He could not know she was here. She had told no one in Topeka where she was going, had signed the agency papers under her mother's maiden name, had burned every letter she'd ever received from the Cutter Ranch before boarding the train. 3. He was smiling like a man who had already won. By 10, Clara had pulled her carpetbag from the overhead rack, settled her hat straight, and decided that she was getting off this train anyway. Running had not worked in Kansas. She was not going to run in Montana. She stepped through the car door and onto the platform, with her chin level and her eyes moving the way her father had taught her to move through a room, cataloging exits, reading posture, counting the seconds before a man looked away. Voss was 30 feet down the platform, talking to a heavy-set man in a tan duster. He hadn't seen her yet. Clara turned in the other direction and walked. The station was small, a single-room building with a hand-painted sign reading, Clearwater, Pop, 312. 3 men stood near the water trough, watching the train unload. A woman in a gray dress herded 2 small children toward the street. A man leaned against the far post, with his hat pulled low and his arms crossed, and his jaw set like he was waiting for something he already resented. Clara headed straight for him because he was the only person on that platform who looked like he was waiting for someone specific, and she did not have time to be cautious. "I'm Clara Weston," she said. "I'm looking for the Cutter Ranch." The man looked up from under the brim of his hat. His eyes were dark brown, the kind of dark that didn't give anything away easily. He was lean in the way that came from work, not from going without. Broad through the shoulders, rough-handed, a jawline that hadn't seen a razor in several days. He looked at her the way people looked at things they hadn't expected and weren't sure what to do with. "Silas Cutter's dead," he said. Clara held his gaze. "I know he wrote to me about marriage. I'm aware he's dead. Who are you?" Something shifted behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that she hadn't flinched. "Eli Cutter. Silas was my uncle." He straightened off the post. "I've been going through his correspondence. I know what he promised you. I'm sorry you came all this way." "How long ago did he die?" 5 weeks. "And you waited until now to send word?" It wasn't a question. Eli's jaw tightened. "I didn't know about the agency contract until 10 days ago. By then, you were already on the train." Clara glanced back over her shoulder. Voss had moved. She couldn't see him now, which was worse than seeing him. "I need to get off this platform," she said. "Is your wagon nearby?" "Miss Weston." Eli's voice carried a particular kind of patience that men used when they were about to say something they'd already decided. "The next train east leaves Thursday. That gives you 2 days. I can arrange a room at the boarding house and cover your return fare. It's the least I can do, given the circumstances.
Mr. Cutter, Clara matched his tone exactly. I am not getting back on that train Thursday. I am not getting back on that train at all. Your uncle made me a legal contract, witnessed and signed by the agency, promising room and board and employment, managing his land records for a period of no less than 6 months. He is dead, but the contract is not. She picked up her carpet bag. Now, I need to get off this platform. Will you take me to the ranch, or should I walk? Eli stared at her. You can't just... The wagon, Mr. Cutter. Please. She walked toward the street without waiting for his answer. After a beat, she heard his boots on the platform behind her. The wagon was a working rig, nothing fancy, with a horse that had the patient look of an animal who had carried heavy things for a long time without complaint. Clara climbed up before Eli could offer to help and settled her bag between her feet. Eli climbed up on the other side, took the reins, and said nothing for the first quarter-mile out of town. Clara said nothing either. She was watching the road behind them in the side mirror of her memory, watching for a tan duster, watching for a particular set of wide shoulders, watching for the smile of a man who'd had 9 years to perfect the look of someone who had nothing to be afraid of. You're not what I expected, Eli said finally. What did you expect? Silas wrote that he wanted someone practical, quiet, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. And you assumed that described someone who would go quietly when you told her to? Eli's hand shifted on the reins. I assumed it described someone reasonable. I am being entirely reasonable. Clara turned to look at him. Your uncle made a legal agreement. I honored my end of it. I sold my furniture, gave up my position at the land office in Topeka, and traveled 1,900 miles on his word. The fact that he died before I arrived doesn't void the contract. It transfers obligation to his estate, which you now control. I'm not a lawyer. No, but I am familiar enough with Kansas and Montana territorial contract law to tell you that a probate judge would likely agree with me. I prefer not to involve a judge, but I will if necessary. She paused. I'm not trying to trap you into anything, Mr. Cutter. I'm asking for 6 months. Room and board. I'll manage your land records, your correspondence, your accounts. At the end of 6 months, either party can dissolve the arrangement. It's in the contract. I don't need my records managed. How many acres does the Cutter Ranch run? A beat. 1,400? How many of those border Clearwater Creek? Another beat. Shorter this time. About 900. And have you registered your water rights claim with the Territorial Land Office since your uncle died? Eli turned to look at her fully now, and Clara saw something change in his expression. Not quite alarm, but the particular attention of a man who had just realized a conversation was moving somewhere he hadn't seen coming. The claim was registered years ago. Silas filed it himself. When your uncle died, his property transferred to probate. During the probate period, any existing claims that haven't been formally retransferred can be contested. Clara kept her voice level. Has anyone filed a water rights dispute against the Cutter property in the past 6 weeks? The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. I don't know, Eli said. His voice had changed. The patience was gone. Then you need me more than you think you do. They rode the rest of the way without speaking. Clara used the silence to think, which was where she did her best work anyway. The ranch came into view on the far side of a low ridge. A main house built solid, if not elegantly. A barn that needed paint, but not structural work. Fenced pasture running south toward the creek. A working ranch, not a wealthy one. The kind of place that stayed standing because of constant effort rather than inherited ease. She didn't say anything about what she observed. She filed it the way she filed everything, methodically, without judgment,
in the part of her mind she kept organized like a land office drawer. Eli pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down. He didn't offer to help her with her bag this time, which she respected more than the earlier impulse. He pushed the front door open and stood back. "Kitchen's there, bedroom's at the back. I've been sleeping in the barn since I got here. The house was Silas's and I haven't quite—" He stopped. "The place is a mess." "I've seen worse." Clara stepped inside. It was, in fact, a mess. Silas Cutter had been a man who filed papers by stacking them and ate meals by leaving the evidence wherever they occurred, and didn't seem to have strong opinions about dust. But the bones of the house were good. Solid walls, a sound floor, a stove that was quality ironwork under the grease. Clara set down her bag and looked at the stack of papers on the table. "May I?" she asked. Eli leaned in the doorway. "Knock yourself out." She didn't touch the papers yet. She looked at them first, the way her father had taught her, reading the surface before you disturbed it, looking at what was on top and inferring from that what was buried underneath. Receipts, correspondence, a folded survey map, 2 envelopes she didn't recognize, and at the bottom of one stack, the corner of something that had the particular ivory color of official territorial land office paper. "When did you find out your uncle had died?" she asked. "Got a telegram 4 days after. I was in Billings." Eli's voice was flat in the way voices went flat when they were carrying more weight than they let on. "Got here as fast as I could." "And you've been here alone since?" "Yes." "No visitors? No one from town coming out to offer condolences or discuss business with you?" Eli's eyes narrowed slightly. "A man named Voss came out about 2 weeks ago. Said he'd had dealings with Silas. Friendly enough. Didn't stay long." Clara's hands, which had been moving toward the stack of papers, went very still. "Harlan Voss," she said. The silence stretched out between them like a wire pulled tight. "You know him?" Eli asked. Clara turned around. She looked at Eli Cutter, at the dark, careful eyes and the set jaw, and the posture of a man who had been carrying something difficult for a long time by himself, and made a decision that she understood was irreversible the moment she made it. "Yes," she said. "I know him. And you need to listen to me very carefully right now, because what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything you think you know about the last 6 weeks." Eli straightened off the doorframe. "Talk." "Harlan Voss is a land thief. Not metaphorically, professionally. He identifies properties with valuable water rights or mineral access, introduces himself as a friendly businessman, and then files fraudulent claims against the property through a network of bribed clerks and cooperative judges. He uses forged, backdated documents to establish a paper trail that makes it look like the previous owner sold or transferred rights before they died. She paused. "He did it to my father's property in Topeka in 1873. He had my father arrested on false charges and died in prison 8 months later. I have been collecting evidence against him for 9 years." Eli was looking at her the way people looked at something that had just reorganized itself into a completely different shape while they were watching. "And he's here. He was on the platform when I stepped off the train. He didn't see me." Clara turned back to the stack of papers. "May I look at these now?" "Go ahead." She moved through them the way she moved through everything, quickly, systematically, her eyes finding the patterns that mattered and dismissing the rest. Receipts, routine. Correspondence, nothing unusual. Survey map, she set that aside carefully. The 2 envelopes she didn't open yet. And then the ivory-colored paper from the bottom of the stack. She unfolded it, read it again. "Mr. Cutter," she said, Eli. Eli. She held up the paper. This is a notice of water rights dispute, filed with the Clearwater County Land Office 18 days ago. It claims that Silas Cutter transferred water rights to Clearwater Creek to a third party in October of this year, 3 weeks before he died. The transfer is dated October 4th. She set the paper on the table and smoothed it flat. Your uncle died on October 9th. Eli crossed the room in 3 strides and looked at the paper over her shoulder. She felt him go tense, the way a wire went tense, all at once.
That's his signature. Is it? A pause. Eli looked closer. It looks like his signature. Does it look exactly like his signature, or does it look like a version of his signature that someone rendered from memory? Clara pointed to the curve of the S in Silas. Your uncle was right-handed. When right-handed men sign their names quickly and habitually, the initial letter of the first name typically angles forward. The pen is moving before the hand catches up. This S angles back. She pointed to the date. And this 4 was written by someone who makes their 4s open at the top. Land office clerks are trained to close their 4s. If your uncle filed this himself, he would have written it closed. Eli straightened up slowly. How do you know what my uncle wrote? Clara reached into her carpet bag and removed a thin leather folder. Inside it were 3 envelopes, still sealed. Because these are the letters your uncle wrote to the agency on your behalf during the last 3 months of his life. I was given copies as part of the contract verification process. She laid them on the table beside the disputed document. Compare the handwriting yourself. Eli didn't move for a moment. Then he picked up one of the agency letters and held it next to the disputed transfer document and looked at them both for a long time without saying anything. It's not his handwriting, he said finally. His voice had gone very quiet. No, it isn't. Voss did this. Almost certainly. And he has at minimum a cooperative clerk at the county land office. Someone who filed this without verifying the signature against existing records. Clara began to carefully organize the papers into 2 separate stacks, legitimate documents and the disputed notice. The good news is that forged documents leave traces if you know what to look for. The bad news is that the dispute will go before a judge in approximately 3 weeks, based on the standard territorial timeline. And if we don't challenge it before then, with documented proof of forgery, the court may accept the transfer as legitimate. 3 weeks. Eli set down the letter. And Voss knows you're here. Not yet, but he will. Eli moved to the window and looked out at the road, his back to her. Clara watched him. He had the posture of a man doing something she recognized. Counting. Organizing fear into something workable. She'd spent 9 years doing exactly the same thing. Why were you running? He asked, without turning around. You said you'd been collecting evidence for 9 years. Why leave now? Clara was quiet for a moment. The honest answer cost something, and she'd learned not to spend more than she could afford in the first conversation with a person she didn't know. But Eli Cutter had just looked at a forged signature and believed her in 30 seconds. And that was worth something. Because 3 weeks ago, a deputy I trusted warned me that Voss had someone inside the Topeka land office, that my files had been accessed, that whoever had accessed them had noted my home address. She picked up the survey map and unfolded it on the table. I didn't run because I was afraid of Voss. I left because I needed to get my evidence somewhere he couldn't reach it, and because I needed time and resources to build a case that didn't depend on Topeka's cooperative institutions. She looked up at Eli. I answered your uncle's advertisement because I needed to go somewhere no one would look for me. I needed work that used my skills. And frankly, I needed to not be alone. The last 3 words came out more honest than she'd intended. She didn't take them back. Eli turned from the window and looked at her.
really looked at her, in the way she'd learned to recognize over 9 years of doing work that required people to either trust you or dismiss you within the first 5 minutes. He was deciding something. She could see it in the stillness of his face. "The barn's cleaner than it sounds," he said. "I can sleep out there. The bedroom's yours." "That's not—" "You're an unmarried woman. I'm an unmarried man. In a town this size, if it gets out that you're here, I want there to be zero ammunition for anyone to use against you." He picked up his hat from the table. "You need to be able to do your work without half the town deciding you're something other than what you are." Clara looked at him for a moment. "That's unexpectedly considerate." "Don't give me too much credit. I just don't want complications." "Neither do I." He moved toward the door. "I'll get your trunk from the wagon." "I can get it myself." He was already outside. Clara stood in the kitchen of a dead man's house in a territory she'd never set foot in before and looked at the 2 stacks of documents she'd built in the last 10 minutes and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time settle into the space behind her breastbone. Not safety, not yet, but the particular feeling of ground beneath her feet, of a problem she could see clearly enough to begin attacking. Harlan Voss had followed her 2,000 miles west and arrived first and smiled at the train door like a man who had already won. He had never once, in 9 years, understood what he was dealing with. Eli came back through the door with her trunk on one shoulder, moving the way strong men moved when they were pretending something wasn't heavy. He set it down at the foot of the bedroom door without ceremony. "There's venison in the cold box," he said, "if you're hungry." "I'll cook." Clara picked up the survey map. "But first, show me the creek boundary on this map. I need to know exactly where your water rights begin and end before I can calculate how far Voss has pushed the false claim." Eli crossed to the table and bent over the map, and Clara leaned in beside him, and they stood shoulder to shoulder over a piece of paper that might be the difference between keeping everything and losing it. And neither of them said anything about the fact that 2 hours ago he'd been planning to put her on a train back east. There was work to do. That was enough for now. Outside, the October sun dropped toward the ridge, and somewhere in Clearwater, a man in a tan duster was already making his next move. Clara intended to be 3 moves ahead of him before morning. She had been preparing for this fight since she was 19 years old. She had not traveled 1,900 miles to lose it now. The survey map told a story that made Clara's stomach tighten in a way she recognized. The specific, cold tightening of someone who has seen a particular kind of lie before and knows exactly how deep it goes. Eli's finger traced the creek boundary the way a man traced something he'd looked at 1,000 times without really seeing it. The claim runs from the North Fork down to the Split Rock, then east along the ridge. Silas filed it in 1869, 13 years without a dispute. Until now, Clara set her finger on the point where the creek bent west, just past the ridge marker. The forged document claims the transfer covers from the North Fork to here, this bend. That's the upper 2/3 of your water access. Without it, the creek that runs past your south pasture is seasonal runoff, usable maybe 4 months a year. She looked at him. "How many head do you run?" 240. Then without the upper creek rights, you lose most of your cattle by March. Not all at once. Slowly. The kind of loss that looks like bad luck instead of what it actually is. She straightened up. Voss is patient. That's what makes him dangerous. He doesn't take everything at once. He takes the thing that causes everything else to fail, and then he waits. Eli was quiet for a moment. His hands were flat on the table, and Clara noticed that they were the hands of someone who had worked hard for a long time. Scarred across the knuckles, rough-palmed, the kind of hands that didn't gesture much because they were accustomed to doing instead of explaining. "How do we stop him?" he asked. We build a case for forgery before the court date. We need 3 things. Clara held up one finger. First, a comparison analysis of the disputed signature against authenticated samples of your uncle's handwriting. Letters, receipts, anything dated and witnessed. Second, she raised another finger. We need to identify who filed the dispute at the county land office and determine whether they examined the original documents or simply accepted what Voss presented. Third, we need to find out if Voss has done this before in this territory, because a pattern of fraud is harder to dismiss than a single disputed document. And if we get all 3, then we take it to a circuit judge, not the county judge, a circuit judge who doesn't have reason to be in Voss's pocket, and we challenge the filing before it becomes a court order. Clara folded the survey map along its original creases. Do you have any of your uncle's correspondence? Anything handwritten, dated before October? There's a trunk in the back room. I haven't gone through all of it. I'll need to go through all of it. Eli looked at her for a moment with that same measuring quality she'd noticed on the platform. Not suspicious exactly, but the look of a man who was accustomed to assessing situations carefully before committing to them. You said you worked in the land office in Topeka. 8 years. I started as a filing clerk when I was 19. By the time I left, I was the primary records analyst for the Western District. And before that? Clara set the folded map down. Before that, I watched my father lose everything to a man who knew how to make lies look like paperwork. So I learned how to read paperwork the way he should have. She met Eli's eyes. I'm not asking you to trust me, Mr. Cutter. I'm asking you to let me do work I'm qualified to do. You can verify everything I find independently. Eli, he said again. His voice had lost the edge it carried on the platform. Eli, she agreed. He pushed back from the table. I'll get the trunk. They worked through Silas Cutter's correspondence until the lamp needed refilling, and Clara's eyes ached from reading cramped handwriting by inadequate light. Eli sat across from her, sorting papers into the piles she designated. Authenticated handwriting samples in one stack, irrelevant documents in another, anything mentioning Voss or water rights in a third. He worked without complaint and without asking unnecessary questions, which Clara appreciated more than she would have expected. By 9 o'clock, she had 11 authenticated handwriting samples from Silas Cutter, letters to suppliers, a bill of sale for breeding stock, 3 receipts for equipment, and a 6-page inventory of the ranch, written in his hand. She laid them out on the table in chronological order, and then placed the disputed transfer document beside them. Look, she said. Eli leaned in. He looked at the documents for a long time without speaking, and Clara watched him understand what he was seeing, the way she'd watched it happen with her father's case. The moment when the abstract wrongness of it became something specific and visible and undeniable. The real documents, he said slowly. His letters are cramped, small, like he was trying to fit a lot onto the page. He wrote like a man who'd been taught penmanship by someone strict about paper waste. Clara pointed to the forged transfer. The forger wrote like someone who'd been given a sample and was trying to replicate the general character of it without understanding the habit behind it. The size is wrong. The pressure is wrong. You can see it in how the ink spreads at the ends of the strokes. She pointed to the signature specifically. And this. Your uncle's authentic signature has a particular break in the C of Cutter, right here, where the pen lifted slightly. It's consistent across every single one of these documents, spanning 11 years. The forged signature doesn't have it. The forger didn't know to look for something that small. Eli straightened up. He looked at the table and then at Clara, and something in his expression had shifted. Not the measuring quality anymore, but something that might have been the beginning of a different kind of attention. You saw all that in the first 10 minutes. I've been looking at documents like this for 9 years. Because of your father. Because of my father. Clara began stacking the authenticated samples carefully. I won't pretend the two things are unrelated. I started learning because I was angry. I kept learning because it turns out I'm good at it. She paused, then added something she hadn't planned to. And because every time I find one of these, every forged signature, every backdated document, every paper lie, I think about the stack of evidence my father could have had if anyone had known what to look for. So I look. Eli didn't say anything for a moment. When he did speak, his voice was quieter than it had been. How old were you when he died? 19. I'm sorry. So am I. Clara tied the authenticated samples with a piece of string from the table drawer. But sorry doesn't beat Voss in court. Evidence does. She expected him to let it go at that, the way most people did when the conversation brushed against something too heavy to carry casually. Instead, Eli pulled his chair back around to her side of the table and sat down beside her. Not close, but close enough that she was aware of it, and picked up one of the documents she'd set aside. Show me, he said. What else do you see that I'm not seeing? Clara looked at him. You want to learn how to read them? I want to understand what you're looking for, so I can help. His eyes moved to the documents. This is my ranch. I should know what's being done to it. Something shifted in Clara's chest, small but distinct, like a door opening onto a room she'd kept closed for a long time. She had worked alone for 9 years because it was easier to work alone, safer. People who got close to what she was doing became targets, and she'd decided a long time ago that she would not be responsible for anyone else the way her father had been responsible for her. But Eli Cutter was looking at her with the particular directness of someone who asked questions because he genuinely wanted the answers, and his ranch was already a target, whether he understood it or not. And there was something about the way he said, "This is my ranch," that reminded her of the way her father had said, "This is our land," like it was a living thing that deserved to be defended. All right, she said. Start with the date. They worked until nearly midnight, Eli asking questions that were more intelligent than she'd expected, Clara answering them with the precision of someone who had spent years organizing complex information into teachable pieces. He caught on fast, faster than most people did, and didn't pretend to understand something when he didn't, which was rarer than it should have been. At some point, without either of them quite deciding to, they moved from the documents to the general shape of the problem. What Voss would do next. What the timeline looked like. How much time they had, and what needed to happen in what order. He knows you're in Clearwater now, Eli said, or he will by morning. Small town. Yes, Clara had been thinking about this since the platform. He'll want to know why I'm here and what I know. He'll approach carefully. He's not a man who makes direct threats. He makes situations. What kind of situations? The kind where suddenly you have a problem with a town official, or a rumor gets started about something that makes you less credible, or someone breaks into an office and certain files go missing. She paused. He had my father arrested on a charge so specific it was clearly manufactured, but so plausible that no one questioned it. He does his damage through institutions, through the machinery that people trust because they assume it's neutral. Eli was quiet for a moment. The county land office clerk who filed the dispute. You think Voss owns him. I think Voss has something on him. There's a difference. Owned men do what they're told. Men with something to hide do what they're told, until the cost of being told exceeds the cost of being caught. Clara looked at the third stack of papers, the ones mentioning Voss. Which means if we approach that clerk correctly, there's a chance he'll talk. And if we approach him incorrectly, Then we spook him, and he runs straight to Voss, and Voss knows exactly what we have." She folded her hands on the table. "Which is why I go alone." Eli turned to look at her. "No. A woman walking into the land office to inquire about a filing is routine. A woman and a tall, angry-looking man walking in together looks like a confrontation. If the clerk is frightened, he'll shut down." She met Eli's eyes. "I know how to have this conversation. I've had it before." "In Topeka, where you knew the town and the people?" "The psychology doesn't change with geography. You don't know anyone here. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong in a county land office in broad daylight." She paused, then added, because it was honest, "And if it does, I'll walk out and come find you." But it won't. Eli looked at her for a long moment. She could see the argument working in his expression, the instinct to protect colliding with a recognition that she was right. She'd watched that particular collision happen in men's faces often enough to know how it usually resolved, which was why she added, before he could speak, "I understand why you want to come. I'd feel the same way if our positions were reversed. But this is the work I know how to do, Eli. Let me do it." The collision resolved. His jaw was still tight, but he nodded once. "I'll drive you to town in the morning. You can drop me at the Mercantile. I'll walk to the land office from there." "I'll be at the Mercantile." It wasn't a question, and Clara didn't argue with it. There was a difference between working alone and being foolish about it, and she'd always known the difference. She was gathering the documents into their organized stacks when Eli spoke again, his voice lower than before. "The woman, Nell, who runs the boarding house in town, she knew Silas well. Honest woman. If anyone in Clearwater is going to give us a straight read on Voss, it's her." "How do you know she's honest?" "Because she told me to my face the week I arrived that I was going to lose this ranch if I didn't get my paperwork sorted, and she didn't soften it any." Something that might have been the beginning of a dry smile moved across his face. "Takes a particular kind of honest to say that to a grieving man." Clara filed this away. "We'll need her." "Yeah." He stood, picked up his hat. "I should let you sleep." "I'll be up for another hour at least." He paused at the door. She was aware of him pausing, the way she was aware of most things. Not with alarm, but with the particular attention she'd trained into herself. "You're going to win this," he said. It wasn't a question or a comfort. It came out like a fact he was stating. "I don't know how you do what you do, but you're going to win this." Clara looked at him. The lamplight made the angles of his face sharper, and something in his expression was open in a way it hadn't been on the platform or at the table. The way faces sometimes opened late at night, when people were tired enough that the managed version of themselves went off duty. "We're going to win it," she said. He looked at her for a moment with that open expression, and then it closed again, not harshly, just carefully. And he nodded once and went out the door. Clara sat alone in Silas Cutter's kitchen and listened to his footsteps cross the yard toward the barn, and thought about the fact that this man, who had tried to put her on a train 4 hours ago, who had every reason to see her as a complication he hadn't asked for, had spent 3 hours learning to read forged documents by lamplight, because he wanted to understand what was being done to his land. She thought about her father, who had trusted the wrong people and paid for it with everything. She thought about Harlan Voss, standing on the platform with that particular smile, the smile of a man who was always several moves ahead, because no one had ever given him a reason to believe he could be beaten. Clara picked up the survey map one more time. She unfolded it and looked at the creek boundary in the lamplight, and traced the line of it with her fingertip. The line between Eli keeping everything and losing it all, and felt the thing she always felt when a problem finally came into full, specific focus. Not fear. Readiness. Voss had arrived in Clearwater 6 weeks ago with a forged document and a bribed clerk, and 9 years of practice. He had, as usual, made the mistake of assuming that the thing he was stealing from would not fight back effectively. He had not counted on her being here. She intended to make that miscalculation the last one he ever made. She put out the lamp and went to work by memory in the dark, organizing the evidence in her mind the way she'd learned to organize it in her father's kitchen the winter after he died, building the case, piece by piece, in the place where no one could take it from her, where no document could be forged or file stolen or record conveniently lost. By the time she finally slept, she had the shape of it. Not all the evidence yet, not the whole structure, but the shape, the architecture of the truth underneath Voss's lies, and that was always where it started. Tomorrow, she would start pulling it into the light. Eli dropped her at the Mercantile at 8 in the morning without ceremony, which she appreciated. He said, "I'll be here," and she said, "I know." And that was the whole of it. The county land office occupied a narrow building between the assayer and the telegraph station, which Clara noted because proximity to the telegraph meant that whoever worked inside had easy access to fast communication. Useful information when assessing how quickly a frightened clerk could get word to Voss. She pushed the door open and walked in like a woman who had done this 1,000 times. Because she had. The clerk behind the counter was younger than she'd expected. Late 20s, slight, with the particular pallor of someone who spent most of his time indoors, and the particular tension around his eyes of someone who hadn't been sleeping. His nameplate read, O. Brandt. He looked up when she entered, and something moved across his face. Not recognition, but the preemptive guardedness of a man who had been expecting trouble for long enough that he saw it in every new face. "Morning," Clara said pleasantly. "I'm hoping you can help me. I'm inquiring about a water rights dispute filed approximately 18 days ago against the Cutter property, Clearwater Creek, North Fork to the ridge boundary." Brandt's hands, which had been reaching for a receipt ledger, stopped moving. "I'm the new land records manager for the Cutter estate," Clara continued, setting her leather folder on the counter, with the particular confidence of someone who had every right to set things on counters. "I'm conducting a routine audit of all active filings since the property entered probate. Standard procedure. I'd need to see authorization from the estate executor," Brandt said. His voice was steady, but his jaw wasn't. "Of course." Clara opened the folder and removed a document she and Eli had drafted by lamplight at 5 that morning. A letter on Cutter Ranch stationery, signed by Eli, authorizing Clara Weston to act as records agent for the estate in all matters relating to property documentation. It was entirely legitimate. She set it on the counter. Brandt read it again. His eyes came back up to her face, and Clara let him look, because she'd learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do in a moment like this was fill the silence. "The filing is a matter of public record," he said finally. "I can show you the registered copy." "Thank you." He went to the back and came back with a folder. Clara took it, opened it, and laid it on the counter beside her own documents. She didn't look at Brandt while she read. She let him watch her read, which was its own kind of pressure. Letting a person see that you were seeing everything, without telling them what you were seeing. The filing was what she'd expected. The forged transfer document, notarized with a stamp she didn't recognize, filed under a claimant listed as Clearwater Water and Mineral Holdings, a company name that hadn't existed, Clara was willing to bet, more than 2 months ago. "Who presented this filing?" she asked without looking up. "It was submitted by a legal representative." "The representative's name?" A pause. "Mr. Voss, Harlan Voss. He said he was acting on behalf of the company." Clara looked up now. She looked directly at Brandt, and she let her voice stay completely even. Did you compare the signature on the transfer document against authenticated samples of Silas Cutter's signature in your existing files? The color that left Brant's face answered the question before he did. Standard procedure for a notarized document is, did you compare the signatures? He looked at the counter. No. Do you have authenticated Silas Cutter signatures in your existing records? Another pause. Longer this time. Yes. Then I'd like to see them. Brant didn't move for a moment. Clara watched him do the calculation. The same calculation she'd watched frightened men do in Kansas, in 3 other counties, in the anteroom of the Topeka courthouse, the day she'd tried to challenge Voss the first time, and failed, because she hadn't had enough yet. The calculation of which cost was higher, the cost of what Voss would do if he found out, or the cost of what this woman clearly already knew. Mr. Brant, Clara said quietly. She lowered her voice, not as a threat, but as an offering. The particular tone that said what she was about to say was between the two of them. I'm not here to put you in a courtroom. I'm here to correct a forged filing before it becomes a court order. Those are 2 very different things. The first one requires witnesses and depositions and a great deal of public attention. The second one just requires accurate records. She held his gaze. I think you'd prefer the second one. His throat moved. He held very still for another 3 seconds, and then he turned and went back to the filing cabinet. He came back with a folder containing 3 documents bearing Silas Cutter's signature. A water usage report from 1878, a boundary adjustment request from 1880, and a tax assessment acknowledgement from the spring of this year. He set them on the counter beside the forged transfer without saying a word. Clara laid them out in a row. She placed the forged transfer at the end of the line. She didn't need her magnifying glass for this one. The difference was visible to the naked eye once you knew to look for the pen lift in the C. I see it, Brant said. His voice was barely above a whisper. I know you do. He put his hand flat on the counter, not steadily. He told me the notarization covered the authentication, that it wasn't my job to verify the underlying document if it came with a notary stamp. That's not accurate under Territorial Land Office regulations, and I think you know that. I know. He looked up. His face had the specific expression of a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had just been given a small chance to set it down. I know that. He knew things about me, about a debt I have. He made it clear that my cooperation on this particular filing would settle certain matters. How much is the debt? Brant blinked. $80. Clara closed her folder. If I can demonstrate to a circuit judge that this filing was made with a forged document and that the county office filing process was compromised, the filing gets voided and no court order is issued. You file an amended notice of procedural error, standard form, nothing that points to you specifically, and this particular problem disappears for both of us. She held his gaze. The debt is between you and whoever holds it. I can't help you with that. But I can make sure this filing never becomes an order that you'd have to defend in open court. Brant stared at her. Who are you? Someone who's been doing this for 9 years, Clara said. Will you pull the original submission envelope? I need to document the postmark and chain of receipt. He pulled it. She was back at the Mercantile in 40 minutes. Eli was standing outside with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had been watching the street for 40 minutes, trying to look like he hadn't been watching the street for 40 minutes. He straightened when he saw her. Well, the filing was accepted without signature verification. Brant knows it was forged. He just needed someone to confirm what he already suspected. Clara kept walking, and Eli fell into step beside her. He's not going to fight us. He won't testify openly. but he'll file a procedural amendment that quietly voids the submission, which buys us time. How much time? Enough, but Voss will know within a day that the filing has been amended, which means we need the rest of the evidence before he files again through a different channel. She stopped at the wagon. I need to see Nell Graves today. Eli drove them to the boarding house without arguing about it, which told Clara something about how the previous 24 hours had reorganized his thinking. Nell Graves was exactly what Eli had described, a woman who didn't soften things. She was 52, broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair pinned severely, and the direct gaze of someone who had learned to read people the way sailors learn to read weather. She took one look at Clara on her doorstep and said, "You're the woman from the train," and opened the door wider. "Silas's girl," she said, settling them at her kitchen table with coffee that was serious and strong. "I figured you'd show up eventually. Eli wrote to the agency about sending you back, but I told him that was foolish." Eli looked at her. "You didn't tell me that." "I told your horse. You weren't listening." Nell set down her cup. "What do you need?" "Everything you know about Harlan Voss," Clara said. Nell was quiet for a moment, in the particular way of people who had a lot to say and were deciding where to start. "He came to Clearwater in August, introduced himself as a land developer, said he was looking to invest in the territory, support local ranchers, that kind of smooth talk." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "Silas didn't trust him. Told me so directly. Said the man asked too many questions about water access and not enough about cattle or crops. A real developer asks about cattle. A man who wants your water asks about water." "Did Silas say anything else?" "He said Voss had asked specifically about the creek rights, whether the claim had ever been disputed, whether the original filing documents were kept at the ranch or at the county office." Nell's eyes went to Clara. "Silas kept duplicates at the ranch, but Voss didn't know that." Clara's hand stilled on her cup. "Silas had duplicate filing documents? In the strongbox in the back room. He was paranoid about records. Said his father lost a land claim because the county office flooded and half the records were destroyed." Nell looked at Eli. "You didn't find them?" "I didn't know to look for a strongbox." "Bottom of the wardrobe in the back room, behind the winter boots." Nell looked back at Clara. "Silas died 5 weeks ago. If those duplicates are still in that strongbox, you've got his original authenticated water rights documentation in his own hand, witnessed by 2 people who are both still alive in this county." The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. "Who witnessed the original filing?" Clara asked. "Reverend Aldous Cole and a woman named Martha Price. She runs the dry goods 2 streets over. Both of them have been here 20 years. Nell's voice was level. "Both of them will remember." Clara looked at Eli. She saw him understand what this meant. Not just the documents, but the witnesses. A forged transfer document against an original filing witnessed by 2 long-standing community members and supported by duplicate authenticated records held at the property. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was the kind of evidence that made a judge look at the other side of the table and start asking uncomfortable questions about how the dispute got filed in the first place. "We need to get back to the ranch," Clara said. "There's something else." Nell's voice had changed. Lower, more careful. She set down her cup and looked at Clara with the expression of someone delivering news they'd been holding for a moment. "Voss was at the saloon last night, asking about you specifically. He knows your name, knows you came in on yesterday's train, knows you're at the Cutter place." She paused. "He told Aldrin, that's our sheriff, and before you ask, yes, he is exactly what you think he is. He told Aldrin that you're a confidence woman who follows widowers in estate situations to extort money from grieving families." The kitchen was very quiet. "He's fast," Eli said, and his voice had gone flat in a particular way. "He's been doing this a long time," Clara said. She kept her voice steady because she needed it to be steady, not because she felt steady. She had known Voss would move against her credibility. She had known it would be quick. She had not quite expected it to be overnight, which told her he was more unsettled by her presence than he'd looked on the platform. A confident man waited. A worried man moved immediately. "Does anyone believe him?" Eli asked Nell. "Aldrin wants to. Some of the men who've been drinking with Voss for 6 weeks want to." Nell looked at Clara without flinching. "The rest of the town is watching." Small towns do that. They wait to see who proves what before they decide. She picked up her coffee cup again. "I've been here 22 years. My word carries some weight. I told anyone who'd listen this morning that Silas Cutter hired Clara Weston directly, and that she came with legitimate contracts and proper references, and that Harlan Voss has been asking peculiar questions about creek water since August." Clara looked at this woman she had met 40 minutes ago and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The specific, unfamiliar warmth of someone choosing her side without being asked to, without being given anything in return. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. Aldrin's going to come to that ranch, and he's going to come with Voss's version of things, and a lot of official weight behind it." Nell met her eyes. "You need to be ready for that before tonight." They drove back to the ranch fast, Eli pushing the horse harder than he usually would, and neither of them talking about it. Clara's mind was already in the back room, already at the bottom of the wardrobe, already running through what authenticated duplicate documents, plus 2 living witnesses, plus Brandt's procedural amendment, plus her own forgery analysis, would look like, assembled in front of a circuit judge who owed Voss nothing. It was enough. She believed it was enough. But belief and proof were 2 different things, and she needed to hold both of them in her hands before Aldrin showed up. The strongbox was exactly where Nell said it would be. Eli had to move a stack of winter gear to get to it, and when he carried it to the kitchen table and Clara opened it, she went still for a moment, the way she always went still, when 9 years of work suddenly became something that fit in the palm of her hand. The original water rights filing was there, 12 pages in Silas Cutter's hand, dated 1869, with the county seal and 2 signatures at the bottom. Reverend Aldous Cole, in neat clerical handwriting, and Martha Price, in the rounder script of someone who didn't write formally often, but understood the gravity of what she was signing. Clara set it on the table beside the forged transfer and didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at them both, the real thing and the lie, and felt the architecture she'd been building in her mind since last night click into its final shape. "Is it enough?" Eli asked. He was standing close, looking at the documents over her shoulder, and his voice was quiet. "It's enough for a circuit judge," Clara said. "It's enough to void the filing, discredit the transfer, and establish a pattern of fraud if we can show he's done this elsewhere in the territory." She carefully placed the original filing back in the strongbox. "I need 2 days to compile everything into a formal submission, and we need to get word to a circuit judge before Voss files a second claim through a different office." "I know a man in Helena," Eli said. "Former Pinkerton. He has connections to the circuit court." Clara looked at him. "You were Pinkerton?" "6 years." Something shifted in his expression. The careful closing she'd seen the night before, when he said certain things. "I left 3 years ago." She didn't ask why. The way he said it carried its own answer, the kind that sat behind a man's eyes and didn't move no matter how long it passed. She understood that particular kind of weight, and she understood that pressing on it before he was ready to carry it openly would only make him close up further. "Can you reach your contact quickly?" she asked instead. "Telegraph today. He can have a circuit judge's attention within 48 hours.
if the cause is strong enough.
The cause is strong enough.
Clara closed the strong flat on top of it, the same way she'd put her hand on her father's land records the last time she saw them, the night before Voss's men came to the house. Except this time, the records were real, and she was not 19 years old, and she was not alone. Write the telegram. I'll start the formal submission. Eli was already moving toward the door when they both heard hoofbeats on the road. More than one horse, moving with the purposeful rhythm of official business. He stopped. Clara looked up. "Aldrin," Eli said. "How many?" He went to the window. "3. Aldrin and 2 men I don't recognize." Clara picked up the strongbox and handed it to Eli. "Put this somewhere that isn't this room," she said. Her voice was entirely calm. "Right now." He took it without asking questions and went to the back, and Clara straightened her folder and stood at the table and waited for the knock on the door, thinking that Voss had made his play faster than she'd expected, but not faster than she was ready for. And that the difference between 9 years ago and right now was not just evidence. It was that this time, when the knock came, she was not going to open the door alone. Eli was back in the kitchen before the second knock landed, and he opened the door with the particular unhurried quality of a man who owned the ground he was standing on and intended to keep owning it. Sheriff Aldrin was thicker through the middle than Voss, with a badge that caught the morning light and eyes that had learned to look official without looking honest. The 2 men behind him were the kind of men who got hired for their size and their willingness not to ask questions. Aldrin took in Eli first, then shifted his gaze to Clara at the table. And something in his expression settled into the specific satisfaction of a man who had been told exactly what he expected to find. "Eli," Aldrin tipped his hat with the mechanical courtesy of someone who did it from habit rather than feeling. "Got a complaint filed this morning about a woman operating under false pretenses on your property, impersonating a legal representative of the estate." "She's not impersonating anything," Eli said. "She's Clara Weston, contracted land records agent for the Cutter estate. I hired her. Here's the authorization." He held out the letter without moving from the doorway. Aldrin took it, read it slowly, the way men read things when they're looking for a flaw rather than a meaning. "This says she manages land records. Doesn't give her authority to conduct official inquiries at the county land office." "I didn't conduct an official inquiry," Clara said from the table. She kept her voice pleasant and her hands visible and still. "I reviewed a public filing. Any member of the public can do that. It's a matter of public record. I believe you know that, Sheriff." Aldrin looked at her with the flat assessment of a man who had been told she was trouble and was confirming the report. "Voss says you've been harassing his legal representative, interfering with a legitimate business filing." "Mr. Voss's legal representative is a company called Clearwater Water and Mineral Holdings." Clara folded her hands on the table. "I'd be very interested to know when that company was incorporated and under whose name, because those are also public records, and I haven't had a chance to review them yet." Something flickered in Aldrin's eyes. He looked back at Eli. "I'm going to need her to come into town and answer some questions." "About what, specifically?" Eli asked. "About her background, her credentials. Whether she is who she says she is." "She is who she says she is. I've seen her contracts, her references, and her authorization from the agency. If you want to verify her identity, I can have documentation to you by end of day." Eli's voice was steady and entirely unmovable. "Is she under arrest?" A beat. "No." "Then she'll stay here. If you have specific legal questions requiring her formal response, file them in writing and we'll respond through proper channels." Eli stepped back from the door, not retreating, just marking the end of the conversation. "I appreciate you coming out, Sheriff." Aldrin stood on the porch for a moment, with the expression of a man recalculating. Clara watched him decide that he didn't have enough to push further today.
watched him file that fact away alongside whatever instructions Voss had given him, watched him put his official face back on and tip his hat again. "I'll be in touch," he said. It was meant to sound like a warning. It landed more like an acknowledgement of defeat, which Clara suspected he knew and resented. After the horses left, Eli closed the door and stood with his hands still on the frame, his back to the room, and was quiet for a moment. "He'll be back," Clara said. "I know." Eli turned around. His jaw was tight in the way she'd come to recognize. Not anger exactly, but the contained version of it, the kind that came from wanting to do something direct and physical when the situation required the opposite. "Voss moved faster than you expected." "He moved faster than I expected because he's more worried than I expected." Clara picked up her pen. "Which means he knows his forgery won't survive serious scrutiny. If he were confident in the documents, he'd let the process move at its own pace. He's accelerating because he needs this resolved before someone looks too closely." She looked at Eli. "I need you to send that telegram to Helena today. Right now, if possible." "I'll write in this afternoon. Aldrin can't stop me from sending a telegram. Don't go through the main telegraph office. Nell mentioned she has equipment at the boarding house." Clara remembered this the way she remembered everything useful. Precisely, without ornament. She said she was a former telegraph operator. If she's willing, we send it through her. Eli picked up his hat. "I'll ask her." He was at the door when Clara said, "Eli." He stopped. She hadn't planned to say the next thing, but she said it anyway, because they had moved past the point where careful management of information was more useful than honesty. "Voss will come to the ranch himself, probably tonight or tomorrow morning. He won't send Aldrin again. Aldrin failed, and Voss doesn't use failed tools twice in a row." She looked at him directly. "When he comes, he'll be charming. That's important to understand. He is genuinely, convincingly charming. He'll have a reasonable explanation for everything, and he'll deliver it in a way that makes you feel like the unreasonable one for doubting him." Eli looked at her steadily. And I need you to let me handle the conversation. Not because I don't trust you, but because he's going to try to make you angry, and an angry man gives him information. The moment you react to him, he knows what matters to you, and he'll use it." She held his gaze. "He's very good at finding the thing that matters, and then threatening it, without ever directly threatening it." Eli was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Something that had the look of something old and known. The kind of reaction that came from a specific memory, rather than a general principle. "I understand that kind of man," he said. Clara believed him. She didn't know yet what had made him understand it, but she believed the understanding was real. "Good. Then you know that the only way to beat him is to give him nothing to work with. We know what we know. We let him talk. We give him the pleasant face of people who have nothing to hide. And then we take everything he says and use it." She picked up her pen again. "Go send the telegram." He went. Clara worked through the afternoon with the focused intensity that always settled over her when the architecture of a case was fully visible, and the only remaining work was building it into something a court could stand on. She organized the forgery analysis into a formal written document, specific, numbered, each point sourced to an authenticated original. She drafted a chain of custody record for the strongbox documents. She wrote out a summary of Brandt's verbal confirmation at the land office in the careful language of a sworn statement that wasn't technically a sworn statement, but would read like one. She was halfway through the 4th page when she heard the wagon and looked up and felt the specific cold clarity that came when she'd been right about something she'd rather have been wrong about. Harlan Voss did not arrive with Aldrin's official weight. He arrived alone, in a good coat, with his hat in his hand by the time he knocked on the door, which was the particular theater of a man presenting himself as non-threatening. Clara had seen it so many times that the performance of it was almost comforting, predictable, like a clock she could set her work by. She opened the door herself because Eli wasn't back yet, and because she'd been preparing for this conversation since she was 19 years old. "Miss Weston," Voss's voice was warm and carried the kind of regret that sounded genuine, because he'd practiced it long enough to believe it himself. He was heavier than she remembered from the platform, broader through the face, the way powerful men got in their 50s, when they stopped being afraid of being seen. "I hoped we might speak privately." "Mr. Voss." Clara stepped back from the door, not warmly, just sufficiently. "Come in." He stepped inside and looked around the kitchen the way he looked at everything, cataloging value, assessing vulnerability, doing it all behind the pleasant eyes of a man who was simply being polite. His gaze went to the table, to her papers, to the folder, and she watched him make the calculation of what was visible and what wasn't. "I want to apologize," he said, sitting in the chair she gestured toward. The apology came easily, which meant it cost him nothing. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. When I filed the water rights dispute, I was acting on information I received about Silas Cutter's intentions. Information that, I now understand, may not have been properly documented." "What information?" Clara asked. She sat across from him with her hands in her lap and her expression perfectly neutral. "Silas and I had several conversations last summer about the possibility of a partnership arrangement. He indicated he was considering divesting some of his water rights to fund improvements to the ranch. I understood those intentions to be formalized before his death." Voss spread his hands, open, regretful, a man wronged by circumstance rather than his own actions. "I see now that the documentation my legal representative prepared may not accurately reflect the situation. I'd like to resolve this quietly, without involving the courts." "That's very reasonable," Clara said. Voss looked at her with the slight recalibration of a man who had expected more resistance. "I'm glad you see it that way. I'd be willing to withdraw the filing entirely in exchange for a modest consideration. A right of first refusal on any future sale of the water rights, should Mr. Cutter choose to sell." That's a very specific ask for someone withdrawing a claim they've just described as based on a misunderstanding. The recalibration happened again, smaller this time, more careful. "A businessman looks for opportunities, even in the process of resolving mistakes." Clara tilted her head slightly. "Mr. Voss, I want to ask you something directly, and I'd like a direct answer." "Of course." "How many water rights disputes have you filed in Montana Territory in the past 3 years?" The warmth in Voss's eyes didn't disappear. It just became deliberate instead of natural. The difference between a fire burning and a fire being maintained. "I've been involved in several land transactions, yes." "Disputes specifically, not transactions." Clara kept her voice conversational. "Filings challenging existing water rights claims on properties that had recently entered probate or changed ownership." "I don't have that number at hand." "I think you probably do." Clara looked at him with the directness she'd spent 9 years building, the ability to hold a man's gaze without aggression, without flinching, without giving him the emotional reaction he was waiting for. "I think you know exactly how many there have been, and exactly how many of them involve documentation prepared by the same notary whose stamp appears on the Cutter filing. I think you know because you've been very careful, and careful men track their own work." Voss looked at her for a long moment. The warm, regretful performance was still on his face, but something underneath it had shifted. The specific shift of a man who has just confirmed a suspicion he'd been hoping was wrong. "You're Weston's daughter," he said. "Yes." "You've been collecting information about me for some time." 9 years. He nodded slowly, the the way men nodded when they were buying themselves seconds to think. Your father was a stubborn man who put himself in a difficult position. My father was an honest man who was destroyed by a dishonest one. Clara's voice stayed flat. I'm not here to relitigate what happened in Topeka. I'm here because the same method you used in Topeka is being used on this property, and I'm not going to let it succeed. You're one woman with a folder of papers. I'm one woman with authenticated original documents, 2 living witnesses to the original filing, a county clerk who is prepared to file a procedural amendment acknowledging that the disputed transfer was accepted without proper signature verification, and a formal forgery analysis comparing the transferred document to 11 authenticated samples of Silas Cutter's handwriting. She paused. And I have a telegram going to a circuit judge in Helena today. The silence in the kitchen had a particular quality. The quality of something that had been in motion, stopping. Voss set his hat on the table. He looked at it for a moment and then back at her. And the performance was mostly gone now, replaced by the face underneath it, not monstrous, just cold. The face of a man who had made a series of practical calculations for a very long time and was currently making another one. What do you want? He asked. I want the filing withdrawn, completely, with a written statement to the land office acknowledging the documentation was insufficient. Clara folded her hands. I want a signed affidavit confirming that Silas Cutter never entered into any verbal or written agreement to transfer water rights. And I want the name of every property you filed a fraudulent dispute against in this territory in the past 5 years. Voss laughed. It was a short sound, not warm. And in exchange? In exchange, the evidence I've compiled about this specific case goes to the circuit judge for review of the filing process rather than for criminal investigation of the individual who filed it. She met his eyes. I'm not a law enforcement officer, Mr. Voss. I'm a records analyst. I care about getting the records corrected. What happens after that is between you and whatever comes next. You'd let me walk away. From this property, today. Clara kept her voice even. I make no representations about what other people with other evidence choose to do. But I won't be the one putting you in front of a criminal court. She paused. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Clara looked at him, and she let herself say the honest thing, because she had earned the right to say it, and because she had waited 9 years for the moment to say it, and because the man sitting across from her deserved to hear it from the specific person he had made by destroying her family. It's about my father's name, she said. It's about a man who spent 8 months in a territorial prison for a crime manufactured by someone who wanted his water rights and knew that the institutions designed to protect him could be turned against him instead. It's about the fact that no one corrected the record then. No one stood up and said the documents were forged and the process was corrupted, and this man was innocent. Her voice was steady, and she made sure it stayed steady. I'm correcting the record now. On this property, in this county, and every county after this where I find what I'm looking for. She straightened. The affidavit and the withdrawal. In writing, today. Those are the terms. Voss looked at her for a long time. The cold face, the calculating face, the face she'd been building toward for 9 years. And then something shifted in it that she hadn't expected. Not remorse. She wasn't naive enough to expect remorse, but something like the particular recognition of a man who has finally encountered the wall he's been moving toward, and understands that the wall is not going to move. I'll need until tomorrow morning, he said. You'll have until Eli Cutter returns from town. That's approximately 2 hours. Clara picked up her pen. I'll have the affidavit template ready when he gets back. You can review it and sign it here, or you can have your legal representative review it. But the signing happens today. She went back to her document without waiting for his response, because she had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply continue working as though the outcome were already decided, and let the other person catch up to the reality you were already living in. She heard Voss stand, heard him pick up his hat, heard him walk to the door, and then pause. "You're like him," he said. "Your father. The same—" He stopped. "Stubborn?" Clara said without looking up.
"Yes, I am."
The door opened and closed. Clara set down her pen and put both hands flat on the table and breathed. Not from fear. The fear was a small thing now, manageable in the way her father had taught her to make it manageable. But from the particular physical release of a moment 9 years in the making finally arriving, and the body needing somewhere to put the weight of all those years. She was still sitting that way when she heard hoofbeats on the road, and looked up and saw Eli riding in fast, leaning forward over the horse the way a man rode when he had news. He pulled up at the porch and was off the horse and through the door in one motion, his face carrying the specific urgency of someone who had found something. "The telegram sent," he said. "But Clara—" He stopped when he saw her face. Read it. Voss was here. He was here. "Are you—" "I'm fine." She picked up her pen. "He's going to bring the affidavit in the morning." "I believe he will, because his alternative is a circuit judge reviewing a criminal pattern that includes Topeka, and I made sure he understood I have documentation on Topeka." She looked at Eli. "Did your contact in Helena respond?" Eli reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, the reply telegram, which meant Nell had already received it. He set it on the table. "Judge is coming to Clearwater. 5 days." Clara read the telegram, read it again, set it down carefully. "That's enough time," she said. "Clara," his voice had the quality it got late at night when the managed version of him went off duty. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her the night before over the documents, but more directly now, the measuring quality replaced by something plainer and more difficult to maintain distance from. "What he said to you, before he left." "I was at the window. I got back before you heard me ride in." His jaw moved. "What did you say to him?" She looked at him for a moment. "I told him what this was about." "Your father." "Yes." Eli set his hat on the table and sat down across from her, and looked at her with the open, off-duty face, and said quietly, "Tell me about him, if you want to." "Not the case. The man." Clara looked at the telegram, at the folder, at 9 years of organized, methodical, carefully controlled work stacked on a dead man's kitchen table. She thought about her father's handwriting, cramped, small, fitting as much as possible onto every page, and the way he had taught her to count through fear, and the way he had believed until the very end that the institutions would work correctly if you just gave them the right information. She thought about the fact that she was sitting in a kitchen in Montana with a man she'd met 36 hours ago who had just ridden fast to bring her good news, and then asked, before anything else, whether she wanted to talk about her father. "His name was George," she said. "He taught me that a document is only as honest as the person who wrote it, and that the only way to tell the difference is to know what honest looks like well enough to recognize when it isn't." She paused. He was right about everything except how far someone would go to make a lie look like the truth. Eli listened without interrupting, the way he listened to everything, completely, without performing attention, the way people listened when they actually intended to remember. Outside, the October light was going the particular gold of late afternoon, and somewhere in Clearwater, a man who had been running the same fraud for 15 years was sitting with the first real accounting he'd ever faced, and trying to decide whether tomorrow morning he would do the right thing or the desperate thing. Clara picked up her pen. She intended to be ready for either. Voss did not come in the morning. By 9 o'clock, Clara had the affidavit template completed in triplicate, the forgery analysis bound in order, and the chain of custody documentation signed and witnessed by Nell Graves, who had arrived at the ranch at first light, with fresh bread and the particular expression of a woman who had decided to be useful and intended to follow through on that decision regardless of what anyone said about it. By 10 o'clock, Clara had stopped pretending she wasn't watching the road. "He's not coming," Eli said. He was at the table with his coffee, and he said it the way he said most things, without softening it, without making it worse than it was, just placing the fact on the table between them and letting her decide what to do with it. "No," Clara agreed, which means he chose the desperate thing. "Yes." She picked up the forgery analysis, which means he's filing again. Different county, different clerk. Or he's going directly to Aldrin to manufacture something else. A reason to get me off this property before the circuit judge arrives. She set the folder down. He's done this before when someone got close. In Topeka, when my father started asking questions at the land office, Voss had him arrested within 48 hours. He didn't wait. He didn't negotiate. He removed the obstacle. The kitchen went quiet in a specific way. Nell set down her bread knife. "Then we don't give him 48 hours. Clara looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean we take this to the town today. Not to Aldrin, to the town." Nell's voice was the voice of a woman who had been watching a community for 22 years and understood exactly how it worked. Clearwater isn't a corrupt town, Clara. It has a corrupt sheriff. Those are different things. The ranchers who border your creek, the families who've been here long enough to remember Silas filing that original claim in 1869. They don't know what Voss is doing. They've been watching a friendly businessman and a suspicious stranger, and waiting to see who proves what. She looked between Clara and Eli. "So we show them." "A public meeting," Eli said slowly. "Martha Price has been wanting an excuse to talk about Voss since August. Reverend Cole will open the church hall if I ask him before noon." Nell picked up the bread knife again with the finality of someone who had made a decision and moved on. "You have witnesses, documents, and a forgery analysis written by someone who spent 8 years as the primary records analyst for a territorial land office. Give people the truth clearly, and they'll generally choose it." She looked at Clara. "Will you speak?" Clara thought about standing in front of a room full of strangers in a town she'd arrived in 2 days ago and asking them to believe her over a man who'd been charming them for 6 weeks. She thought about what that would cost her, the specific vulnerability of it, the way she'd spent 9 years keeping her work behind closed doors and official channels because public credibility required a foundation she'd never had time to build. Then she thought about her father, walking into the Topeka land office alone. "Yes," she said, "I'll speak." The church hall was 3/4 full by 2 in the afternoon, which told Clara something important about how much trust Voss had actually built in Clearwater versus how much he had merely performed. People came because Nell asked them, because Reverend Cole opened the doors, because the ranchers who bordered Clearwater Creek had been quietly uneasy since August and needed someone to give that unease a shape. Clara stood at the front of the room with her folder and her forgery analysis and the authenticated documents from the strongbox. And she looked at the faces of people she didn't know, and she said what she knew to be true in the plainest language she could find. She showed them the original filing. She showed them the forged transfer. She walked them through the signature comparison the way she'd walked Eli through it by lamplight. The pen lift in the C, the pressure at the stroke ends, the date written by a man who made his fours the wrong way. She showed them the Clearwater Water and Mineral Holdings Incorporation documents that Eli had pulled from the territorial records in Helena. Incorporated 11 weeks ago.
2 weeks before Silas Cutter died.
She showed them the same pattern from 2 other Montana counties: a ranch outside Bozeman in 1880, a farm operation near Missoula in 1881, both of which had lost water rights through disputed filings in the months after an ownership change, both of which had subsequently failed. She had found those cases in the territorial records the previous night, while Eli slept and she didn't, cross-referencing the notary stamp from the Cutter filing against every disputed water rights case in the territory for the past 3 years. The notary stamp appeared in all 3 cases. The room was very quiet while she spoke. Not the polite quiet of people enduring something, but the focused quiet of people paying attention, which was different and mattered more. When she finished, Martha Price stood up from the 3rd row. She was a small woman, wiry, with the quick eyes of someone who noticed everything in a room and remembered it accurately.
"I witnessed Silas Cutter's original water rights filing," she said to the room, not to Clara. "I signed my name to it in this county's records in 1869. Silas Cutter did not sell, transfer, or in any way divest those rights before he died. I know because he told me so himself in September, 6 weeks before he passed." She looked at Clara. "I'll say that under oath in front of any judge you put in front of me." Reverend Cole said the same thing, standing without being asked, his hands folded and his voice carrying the particular weight of a man who understood that some things were worth saying publicly, and this was one of them. After that, the room changed. Not dramatically. People didn't stand up and make speeches. It was quieter than that. The specific shift of a community deciding which side of something they were on and settling there. 3 ranchers who bordered the creek came to Clara after and said variations of the same thing. That they'd had a bad feeling about Voss since August and hadn't known what to do with it. That they were glad someone had given it a shape. Eli stood at the back of the room through all of it. He didn't speak, and he didn't need to. But Clara was aware of him the way she'd been aware of him since the first night. Steadily. Specifically. The way you were aware of something that had become necessary without you deciding to need it. It was Deputy Shea who came to her as the room was clearing. He was young, visibly uncomfortable, holding his hat with both hands. "Miss Weston, I want you to know that I filed a formal complaint against Sheriff Aldrin with the Territorial Marshal's office this morning." His voice was low. "I should have done it sooner. I knew about the Bozeman case. Aldrin told me to ignore the filing irregularities when they came across my desk last year. I didn't understand then what I was looking at." He looked at her folder. "I do now." "Thank you," Clara said. "It might not matter. The Marshal's office is slow, and Aldrin has friends." "It matters anyway," Clara said. "It goes on the record. Records matter." Shea nodded and left, and Clara stood in the emptying church hall and felt the particular exhaustion that came after the adrenaline of doing something that couldn't be undone. Not bad exhaustion, but the deep kind, the kind that meant you had spent something real. Eli appeared at her elbow. "You need to eat something." "I need to get back and prepare the submission for the circuit judge." "You need to eat something first." His voice had the quality it got when he'd decided something and wasn't going to be argued out of it. "Nell's feeding half the town at the boarding house. Come eat. The submission will still need preparing in an hour." Clara looked at him. He was looking back with the direct, open expression that appeared when he wasn't managing anything. The face she'd seen by lamplight over documents. The face she'd seen when she talked about her father. The face that had been appearing with increasing frequency and decreasing deliberateness over the past 2 days. "All right," she said. Nell's table was full, which turned out to be its own kind of important. 4 neighboring ranchers, Martha Price, Reverend Cole, Deputy Shea,
and Nell herself, eating together and talking about water rights and land law, and the particular vulnerability of properties in probate, and what the community could do collectively to protect against it happening again. Clara sat between Eli and Nell and answered questions and ate bread that tasted like the best thing she'd had in weeks, and thought about what it felt like to be at a table full of people who were facing the same direction. It was late afternoon when they got back to the ranch. The light was going long and golden, and the creak was audible from the porch, a small, constant sound that Clara had been hearing since she arrived and was only now really listening to. She sat at the kitchen table and worked on the submission, and Eli sat across from her and went through the authenticated documents in the careful, methodical way he developed over the past 2 nights, flagging anything she should include. They worked without talking much because they'd moved past the stage where silence needed filling. It was Eli who broke it, around 7 o'clock, when the lamps were lit and the submission was nearly done. "When the 6 months are up," he said. He didn't finish the sentence. Clara looked up. He was looking at the document in his hands rather than at her, which was how he said things he wasn't entirely sure how to say. She'd learned to recognize it. "When the 6 months are up," she said, "I'll have the submission filed, the circuit judge's ruling in hand, and a formal referral of the Topeka case to the Kansas territorial authorities, with Voss's Montana pattern as supporting evidence." She paused. "The work will be done." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. He had put down the document and was looking at her now with the open face, and there was something in it that was more than just the honest, off-duty version of him. Something that had been building since the first night and had been getting closer to the surface every hour since. "I know it's not," she said. "I'm not good at this." His voice was quieter than usual. I had someone. 3 years ago. She died. I left the work I was doing and came here. And I've been very careful since then not to want anything that could be taken away." He looked at his hands. "I have not been particularly successful at staying careful this week." Clara set down her pen. "I've been careful for 9 years, she said, "since my father died. I built walls the way I built case files, methodically, thoroughly, with attention to every possible point of entry." She looked at him. "I have also not been particularly successful at staying careful this week." Eli looked up. The expression on his face was the most unmanaged she'd seen it. Not vulnerable exactly, because he wasn't a man built for that kind of open exposure, but honest in the particular way of someone who had decided the cost of honesty was lower than the cost of continuing to not say the thing. "I don't know what this is yet," he said. "I know it's something. I know that 2 days ago I was trying to put you on a train east, and now I can't imagine this ranch without you in it. And I'm aware that's fast and probably alarming." "It's not alarming," Clara said. "It's honest. I find honesty considerably less alarming than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" "Pretending we're still strangers, managing a practical arrangement when we're clearly something else." She held his gaze. "I don't know what this is either, but I know it's real. And I know that real things deserve to be treated like real things instead of managed from a safe distance until they go away." Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Stay." Just that. No performance, no qualifications, no careful framework around it. The single most direct thing he'd said to her, delivered in the same quiet voice he used when he meant something completely. "The 6 months," Clara said. "After the 6 months. Stay." He didn't move from his chair, but the stillness of him was different now. The stillness of something that had stopped holding itself back. Not because of the contract or the work or any practical reason. Because this is where you belong. Because you walked off that train with 9 years of evidence and a folder and more courage than anyone I've ever met. And you took this problem apart piece by piece and put it back together right. And I watched you do it, and He stopped. His jaw worked. I don't want to lose you the way I've lost things before. But I'm more afraid of not trying than I am of losing. Clara looked at him across the lamplight, and the organized papers, and the remains of 2 days that had rearranged something fundamental in both of them, and thought about her father teaching her to count through fear, one solid fact at a time. 1. She had come to Montana running from something. 2. She was not running anymore. 3. The man across this table had learned to read forged documents by lamplight because he wanted to understand what was being done to his land, and had ridden fast to bring her good news, and had asked to hear about her father before anything else, and had said stay in the voice of someone who meant it all the way down. "All right," she said. Eli looked at her. "All right, you'll stay?" Or, "All right, you heard me." "All right, I'll stay." Something that had been wound tightly in her chest for a very long time released itself with a particular quietness of something that had been waiting for permission. Not because the work keeps me here, though it does. Not because I have nowhere else to go. Because I have chosen this place specifically. She held his gaze. Because you asked me honestly, and I'm answering honestly. And that is, in my experience, the only foundation anything real can be built on. Eli stood. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and stopped in front of her and put his hand out the way he had that first night over the survey map. Not reaching, just offering. Clara looked at his hand and then at his face, and then she put her hand in his, and he closed his fingers around it, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing left to say, that the silence wasn't already saying better. The circuit judge arrived in Clearwater 4 days later. His name was Morrison, and he had sharp eyes and no particular patience for incomplete evidence or wasted time, which suited Clara perfectly. She presented the forgery analysis, the authenticated originals, the strongbox documents, the 2 witness affidavits from Martha Price and Reverend Cole, Brandt's procedural amendment from the county land office, and the pattern documentation from the Bozeman and Missoula cases. She presented it the way her father had taught her to present everything. Clearly, in order, each piece earning the next, the architecture of the truth built so that it stood on its own without needing her to defend it. Voss had a lawyer. The lawyer was competent and presented Voss's case with the practiced fluency of someone accustomed to making insufficient evidence sound like more than it was. He challenged the forgery analysis as the opinion of an unlicensed expert. He challenged Brandt's amendment as a self-serving revision. He challenged the pattern documentation as circumstantial. Judge Morrison listened to all of it without expression. Then he looked at the documents again. He looked at the signature comparison, the pen lift in the C, clearly annotated in Clara's analysis. He looked at the incorporation date of Clearwater Water and Mineral Holdings against the date of Silas Cutter's death. He looked at the notary stamp appearing on 3 fraudulent filings across 3 counties over 3 years. "The filing is voided," he said. He said it the way people stated facts that were not interesting enough to require elaboration. "The water rights of the Cutter property remain with the Cutter estate as registered in 1869. Mr. Voss's claim is dismissed with prejudice." He looked at Voss over his papers. "I'm also referring this matter to the Territorial Attorney General's office, along with Miss Weston's documentation of the Bozeman and Missoula filings, for investigation of a potential pattern of fraud. You will make yourself available for that investigation." Voss sat very still. The warm, regretful face was entirely gone. What remained was simply a man who had run out of moves and knew it. Clara sat beside Eli in the church hall. Judge Morrison had taken it over for the proceeding and heard the ruling and felt the thing she had been waiting 9 years to feel, which was not triumphant or dramatic. It was quieter than that. It felt like a door closing on a room she had lived in too long, and the sound of it closing was smaller than she had expected and more complete. She felt Eli's hand find hers under the table. She held on. Nell was crying in the back row, quietly, in the manner of a woman who cried at things that mattered and didn't apologize for it. Martha Price was nodding with the satisfied expression of someone who had known the truth all along and was glad to see it formally acknowledged. Deputy Shea, who had received his formal appointment as acting sheriff that morning pending the territorial marshal's investigation of Aldrin, was standing by the door with the careful posture of someone still getting used to the weight of a new responsibility. Outside, after, Clearwater felt like itself again. The specific quality of a place that has been holding its breath and has just exhaled. People stood in the street and talked, and the conversations had the ease of people who were no longer watching each other for signs of what was coming next. Eli drove them back to the ranch in the late afternoon, and the October light was doing the thing it did this time of year in Montana, going deep and amber, and making everything it touched look like something worth keeping. Clara sat beside him on the wagon bench and didn't talk for a while, and neither did he. And the silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind that two people only had when they had stopped performing ease for each other and simply felt it. "The Topeka referral," Eli said eventually. "How long before that moves?" "Months, probably. Maybe longer. Territorial processes are slow." Clara looked at the road. "But it's in motion. It's on the record. The evidence is filed and attributed and cannot be quietly lost." She paused. "That's what my father deserved 12 years ago. That's what I wanted to give him. You gave it to him. I gave it to him." She said it plainly, without decoration, because plain was what it deserved. Eli pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and sat for a moment before moving. He turned and looked at her with the direct, open face, the one she'd stopped bracing herself against 3 days ago. "I want to ask you something." "Ask." "The agency contract, the 6 months." He held her gaze. "I know we've already talked about after, but I want to do this correctly." He reached into his coat pocket and took out a ring. Plain silver, worn smooth, clearly old. "This was my mother's. She was a practical woman who didn't believe in ornamentation, which is probably why it suits you." He held it out. "Marry me, Clara. Not because of the contract or the work, or because you have nowhere else to go, but because we're the same kind of people, and we've built something real from the ground up in less than a week, and I think what we could build together in a lifetime is worth beginning properly." Clara looked at the ring. She looked at the man holding it, unshaven, serious, offering her his mother's ring in a wagon at the end of a lane in Montana, with the unsentimental directness of someone who said what he meant and meant what he said. She thought about the girl who had stepped off a train in this territory 2 days ago, with a folder of evidence and no faith in anything except the work. She thought about what it meant to find, in the course of doing the work, something that was not the work at all. "Yes," she said. "Properly and completely and without any reservations I'm not telling you about first." Eli slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as though it had been waiting. They were married in Reverend Cole's church on a Thursday morning, with Nell Graves as witness and Martha Price in the front pew, and Deputy Shea standing at the back with his new badge, and his new posture, and the particular expression of a young man who was glad to be in the room. Clara wore her gray traveling dress, because it was the best thing she owned, and because she had learned, definitively, that the quality of what you wore to a ceremony mattered considerably less than the quality of what you brought to it. When Reverend Cole asked if anyone present knew a reason these two should not be joined, the church was quiet in the way of a room full of people who had watched two people fight for something real and were glad to see them choose each other at the end of it. Eli said his vows in the quiet, direct voice he used when he meant something all the way down. Clara said hers with the precision of a woman who understood the weight of a promise and had decided this one was worth the full weight of everything she had. They walked back to the Cutter Ranch in the October light, her hand in his, the creek audible before they could see it, that small, constant sound of water moving over stones, the sound of the thing they had fought to keep, running clean and uninterrupted through land that was fully and legally and permanently theirs. The barn needed a new door. The south fence still had a weak post that Eli had been meaning to address. The formal submission to the Territorial Attorney General in Topeka needed 2 more supporting documents that Clara intended to have completed by week's end. There was work to do, as there always was, as there always would be. But the work would be done by 2 people who had found each other in the process of doing it, and had chosen each other clearly and without conditions, and had built the beginning of something honest on the only foundation that could hold. Not luck, not rescue, not the convenient arrival of someone else's solution, but their own specific, hard-won, fully earned truth. A woman who knew how to read a lie had come to Montana to fight one, and in the fighting of it had found a man who asked to understand what she was doing rather than to do it for her. And the land they stood on knew it, and the creek said so, and nothing that had been taken from Clara Weston's family by fraud and fear and institutional corruption could touch what she had built here, because she had built it herself, with her own hands and her own mind, and it was hers in every way that mattered. Some things, once built correctly, simply cannot be taken away.